I'm Demi.
And I'm Mona.
Thanks for tuning into What's Brewing.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of What's Brewing. We're so excited to be back. We're kind of getting back to our flow of things. But as usual, we'll start off with our question, which is what's in your cup? So Demi, do you want to share?
Yes, so I didn't get to show my cup last episode, but I got this cup from Target Bullseye. Well, I didn't. Ali gifted this to me. It's just this pink bubble glass cup, and I just have some cold brew in it with some Chobani sweet creamer. That's the only thing that's in here. That's typically what I drink when I'm drinking coffee at home and I'm drinking like ice. But fun fact, I only drink iced coffee outside of the house. Anytime I pour coffee at the house like this, I never put ice in it. I just don't like super, super cold drinks. And so that's like the perfect temperature, just pulling it out of the fridge. So that's what's in my cup. And then I did want to say this too. If you have a Publix near you, Publix says buy one, get one free on the Chobani creamers here and there. And so you get more bang for your buck if you're somebody that's on the couponing side of things. What about you?
Wait, question. What kind of cold brew or iced coffee do you have in your cup?
I always use the stock cold brew, the one that is green. That's my favorite one. I find it to not be watery, and it's the most, I guess, like to me, coffee concentrated, but not on the bitter tasting side. So that's my favorite. I buy like 2 bottles a week, but I save money that way.
Interesting.
It's good. Mm-hmm.
I'm the same way with you. I don't. Honestly, if I'm home, I'm a hot coffee. Like I'm like the regular, just, put a hot coffee in a mug.
Sure.
But if I drink iced coffee, it's almost always when I'm out. Like I think the few times I've made iced coffee at home, it doesn't hit the same way as like my Dunkin' iced coffee.
Yeah.
But yeah, no. If you watched the last episode, not gonna lie, I'm still drinking the same cup of coffee. But yeah, I guess on to the next question real quickly, which is any hot takes you want to share for this episode?
I'm trying to think. Oh, okay. So I do have a hot take. I've been writing a list of things that I've like been loving lately. So let me pull up my handy dandy notes. But the one that I will say is I will have to also show this on our stories, but there are these wax melt cups. So I use wax warmers around the house more than I do candles. And there are these cups where you can either reuse or dispose them after every single like wax melt that you burn or melt. So that's my hot take. It's easy cleanup. You don't have to worry about getting whatever wax warmer you have all messy and stuff. So if you're somebody that's into home scents and making your home smell fresh and you don't want to burn candles, then look for a wax warmer and then just use the reusable cup on it. I'll the reusable liners. I'll link it on our stories.
Ooh,
what about you?
Yes, please do. So my hot take is kind of like random. But lately I'm planning my grocery shopping trip this weekend, and I don't know how I forgot about this, but if you're in the Philadelphia area, there's this like produce place called Produce Junction. And they're open kind of, I think, on weekends, and they're kind of spread out throughout the city, and they sell like really affordable local produce. If I'm not mistaken, don't quote me, I think it's like organic and locally grown. It's a lot cheaper than buying your produce at the grocery store. So my kind of hot take is just like supporting local, like getting your produce from these like smaller, like locally grown places. And it's been a while. I have not been back in the islands in a very long time, but for any of our listeners who are back in the Mariana Islands, specifically Saipan, I remember growing up and there's this thing called Sabalu Market, which was like every Saturday. I think it was like on Beach Road or something. I really can't remember, but it was like this market where it was like along the beach, and you would just see different vendors like selling cucumbers, like pechay, like all these different vegetables and fruits and all of that. And, if you're on the islands, and I don't know if Sabalu Market is still a thing, but like, getting your produce from there, like supporting local. And honestly, with all the inflation that's happening and all these like million and billionaires out here trying to raise the prices of food, I think for me, that's kind of like the train I've been on, is like, how do I start like shopping small, shopping local? And an even better one is if you can buy it from business owners of color, people within your community. So yeah, that's kind of like my hot take. And yeah, so I think that Actually, speaking of Sabalu Market, brings us to our topic of today's episode, which is, it's Chamorro Month, which, I believe is more of a Guam holiday, if I'm not mistaken. But you know what? If we're celebrating Chamorros in one place, we're celebrating Chamorros all over. So, with that being said, I think kind of starting off with, what are some of your favorite things like about being Chamorro, or like how do you celebrate your Chamorro-ness, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, that's a really, really great question, being out in the States, because I think that that is a very layered question too. You feel very far removed, but I still think that you can find, a way to bring out your Chamorro-ness. So, first and foremost, Biba to this month, it is definitely a special month for Mona and I, just being Chamorro women, women of color. I hate using the word, but minority women. But some of the things that I love about being Chamorro is, of course, our community and culture. And although every community has its division, one thing that I can say is like Chamorros really take care of each other. They take care of their community, they take care of their village. And even as a diaspora out here in the States, one thing that I feel like has always been, I guess, embedded in me and just growing up and stuff was like, looking out for people, giving people the shirt off your back. And that's probably been one of the hardest things, because then what ends up happening is you end up having too big of a heart. And sometimes people can take advantage of that. But I think that's one thing that was always instilled in us is like, obviously make sure you're taking care of yourself, but also to make sure that the people around you are taken care of. And so I feel like I can speak for majority of Chamorros where community is a huge, huge thing. And I also say that in having conversations with some of my friends and stuff, when we talk about our backgrounds, our cultures, our family life, a lot of times the community aspect is missing from, their maybe childhood and upbringing versus mine, and even a lot of ours, whether it's going to the fiestas, going to different, I hate to say this, may all souls rest in peace, but the rosaries, those are like all community things, and just having people in all walks of life, whether it was a baby shower, whether it was a death in the family, whether it was a graduation, a wedding, like tomorrow's will show up and show out when it comes to, just celebrating each other. That if somebody's making the empanada, somebody's making the lumpia, somebody's doing the party favors, right? Like you can literally make an entire event happen because some family from each, of your villages or community is going to show up for you. So that's probably one of my favorite things, if not my favorite thing about the Chamorro culture. What about you?
It's actually a good transition because you mentioned like making empanadas, right? And for me, I think when you think about food is a really big part of a lot of cultures, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
and when I say food, it's not just like the act of like eating the food or cooking the food, but food represents like love, food represents like family, food represents, like you said, like community, like coming together. And that's like, like you said, like the fiestas, like everyone's bringing something, someone's in charge of the red rice, someone's in charge of the chicken kelaguen, and like we use food as a way to like bring ourselves together. And a memory actually came up, which is something that like I've really learned from my dad, but I think is true for a lot of Chamorros across the board, especially when you start to interact with, individuals that are out here, like in the States, right? Like those who are like non-Chamorros for the most part. But growing up, right, we would be like eating dinner or eating lunch and someone would stop by the house, right? And every time that would happen, my dad would, the first thing he would say is like, come and eat, come and eat. Like no matter who the person is, it could be a
Mm-hmm.
random,
Oh, that's so true.
person. I remember, we had someone that would help with like the grounds and like the landscaping around our house, and they would stop by to like let my dad know like, hey, we're done, bush cutting out here. My dad's like, oh, come and eat, sit
Yeah.
down and eat. And that's just something that's really stuck with me, where like, food just brings people together. And um one, I will always say Chamorro food is my top tier number one favorite type of food, but obviously I'm biased when it comes to that. But two, for me, it's more so like what Chamorro food does for people. Like to your point, right? Whether it's making like empanadas, like it's always like a thing. Like my one of my favorite things to do, like whenever my parents are visiting us out here, is like when we make tortillas, for example, right? Like someone is mixing the dough, someone is like pressing the dough down, someone's over
Yeah.
at the stove like flipping the tortillas. Like it's this community building, and like it's like you're passing things down to one another. And kind of as a side note to like end this whole topic about food on my end, is something I started working on for my family internally is a cookbook. And I'm calling it the Mangi Life. So, or
Oh,
Mangi.
cute. You
I'm
need
going to
to
get
sell
some hate
this.
about how it's called. It's kind of a play on words because, you know, for everyone that knows, like my maiden last name is Manglonia. So it's like Mang. So like the Mangi Life. Um, so I'm starting this internal cookbook. So it has like a combination of all my family's different recipes. So like it has my mom Pat's tatizas. It has my sister Anna's buttermilk fried chicken on there. It has my kimchi adobo, which is like my special secret recipe for my adobo. So it has just like the combination of things that, you know, at some point we can pass down to like our family members. So that's kind of like a side project I've been working on over the years. But yeah, I'd say kind of like what food does for a community is definitely like one of my favorite things about being Chamorro.
Yeah, I love that because from the preparation to the consumption, right? We're definitely in community, and my family's the same way too. Anytime my mom's like, "So and so is asking for empanada," or "So and so is asking for lumpia," I'm like, "All right." We call it the assembly line, and we've had this running joke in my family for years, ever since my mom started showing us how to make empanada and lumpia. And when people would request it, that was like her. That's what my mom's known for, is like her empanada and lumpia. Is we would always say, "Oh, the factory's open." Anytime you heard the factory's open, that meant go wash your hands, get to your station. Like you already know what's about to happen. So I definitely think, you know, it's one of those things that, like I said, from preparation to consumption, food is definitely plays a big role in the Chamorro culture. And I love that. I love that about our community and our culture. On the flip side of that, though, you know, we'll talk a little bit about being Chamorro in the States, especially if you're somebody that is not located around a lot of Chamorros. Personally, me, I'm in Atlanta. There's not a lot of Chamorros in this area, but if you go to Columbus, it's about 2.5, 3 hours away from here. There's more Chamorros because of the base. So I definitely have a harder time of finding community. So I always tell Tiana, I know she listens to these podcast episodes, that she's like my sense of home, and we can just like
Hey,
say things
girl.
and we get it, right? We can just say things and we get it. But it's really hard when you're not surrounded by that and you're only getting it from your family, right? Like you miss the fiestas, you miss just the cultural aspect of being able to like sit at a table and say something and people know what you're talking about, or even being young women, or when maybe not young anymore, but women that are in our late 20s going into 30s. It's, you know, there's
You're
so
still
much that
young.
is yeah, I guess you could say we're still young. We haven't hit certain thresholds. But you know, there's a lot that we go through out in the States. Obviously, living stateside is very different, and I think for a really, really long time. And one thing that, I mean, maybe this is controversial when I say this, but there's this whole debate of, you know, are you Chamorro enough if you were raised in the States, and are you,
Mm.
you know, like island enough to know XYZ about what's going on. And I do want to say this. I think one thing that Mona and I are trying our best to do our due diligence is like really making that impact and planting our seed back home. And, you know, eventually we want to get back home too. But I feel like this conversation can be so layered. I kind of want to get your thoughts on that too, just on your Chamorro journey and where you're at with your identity and being Chamorro out in the States.
Yeah, well, you know, this can be very controversial for some people listening. To be frank, I really don't care.
Right. These are
We
our
have to think about
opinions
like what, right.
and
We have
feelings.
to think about what like colonialism has done for, you know, our Chamorro people, and how like even when you think of the diaspora and like the reason why Chamorros have to like leave home in order to, you know, go after the freaking American dream, which low key kind of is like a nightmare sometimes.
Damn.
um, you know, we see like our culture die, our language die, or like feeling the need to like fit a certain box in order to succeed in life, right? And I think for me, that's been something I've always struggled with my Chamorro identity is like, number one, I'm not fluent in our language, in our native tongue. And that to me has always been something that I feel has been like stolen from me in a way. And not so much to like blame my parents, right, for like not speaking to me in Chamorro as often, but I understand the reasoning behind it, you know. And I remember when I was a young girl, I used to ask my dad, like, Dad, why didn't you really speak to us in Chamorro? And he used to say, well, because when you go out into the real world, like, I want you to be able to, like, be able to compete with people in the real world, like, be able to speak their language and be able to advocate for yourself. So I know when it was coming from a good place on his end, but at the same time, like, as an adult now, I feel like that's one of the areas that I feel very disconnected, right, from my culture and my identity. But, um, I think kind of in general, like you said, being Chamorro here in the States, it's crazy. But next year will be 10 years since I've been back in the islands. And
Mm.
um, you know, in full transparency, this is something I've never really talked about out loud. There are two things that come to mind as to why it's been 10 years since I've gone home. One is, girl, it's an arm and two legs to go home, right?
Right. Especially
And
now.
not only that, right. And not only that, but it's like time. Like it's hard. Like you go home and what you want to be there for like a month at least, right? Like you're traveling halfway across the world. But it's time, you know, like being able to take time off from work and like go back and like really just, you know, enjoy your time there. But number two, and this is the part where there's a little bit of shame when I talk about this, but for some reason it's also like this feeling of fear of like, I don't know if I feel like an outsider sometimes. And I know a lot of that is just like me in my head, but I feel like because I've been in the States for this long, I struggle, like I feel like sometimes I'm hanging by a thread when I think of my Chamorro identity, and that's something that I try to like I'm not as intentional, I'll admit, of like holding on to a lot of that. But to your point, right, like one of my favorite things to do is like when I'm at my sister's, for example, and like we have, you know, we're hosting like a gathering and like a bunch of the Chamorros in the area come together. It's like automatically this switch happens where you just feel like a part of something that's natural to you. And that's something that I feel like I yearn for a lot of times, is like just that feeling. But sometimes, to your point, you know, I don't know, if you're a Chamorro and you live in the Philadelphia area, hit me up, let me know. But yeah, that's kind of like the part where I struggle with the most, is like holding on to every bit of your Chamorro identity, but then also like the external forces that make it kind of hard to do that, if that makes sense. How do
Yeah.
you, what are your thoughts on that?
No, I absolutely love that. I never really thought about it, but as you're saying it out loud, I'm like, I feel that too. And so, definitely the fear of going back home and not knowing enough, and definitely being an outsider, right? So, I haven't been back home since 2001. So, it's been 20 plus years at this point. And I remember when my family went back home, just a good bit. I didn't go because I was taking summer classes. So to your point of like, obviously life happened, and let me backtrack as to how I got to the States, and then I'll talk a little bit about the trip in 2016. So to your point of like the American dream, my parents were like, you know what? My dad enlisted in the military. My mom was like, we just need more for the girls. Like, we got to get off island. So that's how we ended up to the States, which I feel like a lot of Chamorros, that's actually what ends up happening, is they join the military and they go off island. And you got to think about it. You know, you have access to more resources, more money, job security. So we are in the States and have been
Benefit,
in the States since, yeah, benefits, access to healthcare, you know, quality healthcare, all types of
right?
things. So we moved to the States, been in the States, you know, since then. And I have yet to go back home, staying because it costs an arm and a leg. The time that my oldest sister and my parents went back home in 2016, I didn't go because I was about to graduate college. I needed like a couple more classes to graduate in May of 2017. And the only way that I can do that is if I took the summer classes. So I was like, y'all, like, I'm committed here. I can't go. Like, I'm trying to, you know, get out of school at this point to get my bachelor's. So that's the reason why I didn't go back home. But I remember when they came back, they were telling us how great the trip was. And they were like, oh my gosh, like if you guys went back home, they were talking about me and my middle sister. They're like, you guys would be, there's a sense of culture shock because there's a lot of things that you guys would not know how to do. And so I don't know, how I'm assuming that it's for a lot of families, but you pass down a lot of those traditional things, right? So like it would be the people, my cousins my age would be the ones cooking. The males would probably be the ones setting up the canopies. There's like you're passing on that tradition of like now it's your turn to do these things. And of course, with me coming from, I guess like a smaller immediate family, like we just don't do those things. Like we have a system in a sense of somebody cooks, somebody washes dishes, somebody dries the dishes, but it's not to the extent of like, oh, so and so you're known for making this, you're gonna focus on the working on this, or creating, excuse me, cooking this in the outside kitchen or whatever it is, right? Or already coming to the fiesta with it prepared, and so to your point though, I definitely, when they said that, I was like, oh my gosh, like I know that I would probably be like, there's a sense of culture shock. And I'm not saying that for it to be misconstrued or for me to act like I'm been off island and I'm too good. It's just that's not something that I'm used to. And what's kind of upsetting about it is as a community, and tourism is very big in the CNMI and Guam. So when tourists come, more than likely, what I would assume is the Chamorros are very welcoming, right? Like they want you to know about their community. They want you to come eat. They want you to try, the fresh coconut on the side of the road or the pickled mango or pickled papaya on the side of the road. But if we go back, this is kind of what I'm envisioning. If we go back, we're almost, I don't want to say shunned. That's probably not the best word to use. So don't cancel me, but that's the only word that can come to my mind right now. But people would probably be like, why do you not like this? Or why do you not know how to do this? But you have to understand, like, the shoe on the other foot. I'm so far removed being raised out in the States that it's going to take a lot for me to like learn and understand certain cultural aspects. I'm only getting it from my sister, my oldest sister, who was born and raised back home, and then my parents, um, but I do think that that's one thing that I would hope when we go back home is that there's going to be, that welcoming us with open arms and understanding that, like I said, I've been out here 20 plus years, and by no means am I saying that I don't ever want to go home. I always tell my parents that if I'm not married and I don't have kids and I pass, go ahead and ship me back. I would like to be buried back on the island. But I do think, to your point, until you said it out loud, I was like, no, I actually really, really feel that. And I think part of it is I've always envisioned me going back with my family and my parents in particular, because this is gonna sound bad, but I feel like they can advocate for me, right? They can be like, oh, she doesn't know because like we didn't raise her in that way. And I almost feel like, okay, they can advocate for me versus me being like, oh, my parents we didn't do that growing up and stuff. And I think that's another thing too is, and this is going to have to be another episode because I promise we can probably go another 20, 30 minutes. But even the way that Chamorro women are raised, there's a lot of times where my dad, gets upset because he's like, sometimes you're, disintenta and you don't listen and you're disrespectful. And I'm like, it's not that. It's just like I'm vocal about how I feel. And I know like back in the day, we didn't really, you couldn't do
Mm.
that or you were considered disrespectful. But like my parents did not raise me that way. And so I know my dad struggles with, okay, we raised you to be vocal, but you can't be vocal towards me. And then my mom's like, well, we didn't raise her to be that way, so you can't get upset. So that's a separate conversation that can be super layered. But
Mm.
I 1000% feel how you feel when it comes to going back home and wanting to be accepted of open arms. And like I said, just understanding that, whether same here, I'm not like native, I'm not native to the our native language. And I think another part of that for me, and I'll leave it at this, is when I moved to the States, my accent was so strong that they put me in ESOL, so I think, or ESL, I think that's what they call it now. That's the reason why my parents always made sure that we were speaking English because we were being raised in the States. It's not until now that, and in the most recent years, now that we're older, where I'm like, Mom, like one of my biggest regrets is like not knowing our language, especially because a lot of people consider it a dying language. And I started following this guy on What's Brewing, and he said that he went 30 years with not knowing any Chamorro. He's 33 now, and he's like fluent in the language. And he actually like teaches,
Mm.
kind of like a Duolingo for the Chamorro language. And so I'll share his page as well because I go on his page and like listen to some of the things that he's saying, but I don't want to go on too far of a tangent. But I definitely agree.
Yeah.
You're heard on that.
Just to touch on, piggyback on that point, because our previous episode, we talked a lot about like community building. And this is the part where I want to definitely talk about like the intentionality and the accountability, right? Because I will be honest, I know on my end, there's a lot more I can do to feel more connected to my Chamorro identity. And one of those things is, oh my gosh, I don't even know if my family members really listen to this podcast, but my brother from my mom Pat, he started teaching me a little bit of Chamorro. He's actually a professor at University of Hawaii, and teaches Chamorro classes. And I'm not even gonna lie, I kind of like fell off of that, and I wasn't as committed at the time. And I don't know if you're speaking about the same person, but I follow on Facebook the Guam Bus, I think,
No,
and
this
they
is somebody
often
just
post.
talking about.
Oh, okay. Every week or something, they post like vocabulary words on Facebook, and I actually started like saving the vocabulary words and sharing it with like my godson so that we can kind of learn together. But that's one of those things where I'm also recognizing on my end. Sorry, my laptop's about to die. Let me just plug it in real quick. That's one of the things I've been recognizing on my end is like, what can I do right now? Because again, like we live in the era of like the internet, right? There's like a lot
Mm-hmm.
of resources stuff out there.
Right.
So that's a challenge I would say for like the both of us, and for anyone else listening that might feel disconnected, is how are we going out to find community? How are we, what are we doing to ensure that we're keeping our culture alive? Because that's one of the fears I have, but just to kind of go away from the fear, because like as you and I were talking, it made me think like, we shouldn't feel this like this. We shouldn't feel afraid. We shouldn't feel like outsiders, because it goes against everything like we just said in the beginning of the episode, which is like community, family, like it takes a village, right? All of that. And I think that's kind of what happens when we've been in the States for so long, is that we kind of start to have more of this like Americanized feeling or thought about like how we should be. But at the end of the day, like to our core, we are Chamorro. And like, how do I embrace that a little bit more? So I just kind of want to maybe like end with that is, there are lots of resources out there. A resource could be reaching out to your auntie, reach out to your uncle, reach out to your parents and say, hey, start speaking to me in Chamorro. Or, hey, can you teach me how to make these Chamorro dishes? Or, I don't know, girl, maybe we need to start a monthly webinar where people who feel how we feel come together, right? Like there's just so many different ways that I'd like to just challenge ourselves to, especially this month as we talk about like Miss Chamorro and what it means to be Chamorro and celebrating Chamorro voices and Chamorro leaders and all of that. Yeah, that's something I just want to end with is like I know I can be more intentional about it and kind of removing the fear and start more so like embracing the opportunity to like grow closer to our Chamorro identity.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. We have to hold ourselves accountable in wanting to learn more and do more. And, like you said, even whether it's, weekly Chamorro lessons on our language or creating that community and seeing, who else feels how we feel and just kind of sharing our stories and our thoughts. I think that's important, but we'll leave it at that. Happy Chamorro Month. Embrace your Chamorro-ness, if that's even a word, and we'll see y'all next time.
As always, thank you for your support and being a part of the WBP family.
Don't forget to rate and review our show on whatever platform you're listening on.
And follow us on social media at What's Brewing Podcast.